Before Egypt and Iran kicked a single ball at the 2026 World Cup, FIFA had already created one of the most explosive controversies of the entire tournament. A controversy so powerful that it crossed football, politics, religion, culture, and human rights simultaneously. A controversy that generated more social media content than almost any other story from the opening 2 weeks of the competition. A controversy that had the whole world arguing before the players had even boarded their buses to the stadium. All of it about a group stage football match. And the most unsettling part of the entire story is this. The decision that started everything was not an accident. It was not a miscommunication. It was a deliberate, planned, institutionally approved choice, made at the highest levels of the organization that runs the world's most popular sport. This is the story of what really happened in Seattle, and why it reveals something about the modern World Cup that nobody at FIFA wants to say out loud. When the 2026 World Cup draw was made in Washington in December, Egypt versus Iran was scheduled as a group stage decider. Two competitive nations, real football stakes, the kind of fixture that produces genuine tension and genuine quality on the pitch. Nobody was talking about this match in January, or February, or March, or April, or May. And then in the days before kickoff, it was confirmed that the match environment surrounding Egypt versus Iran in Seattle would include pride-themed visual elements consistent with FIFA's official inclusion policies. Rainbow flags in the fan zones, pride symbols in the stadium corridors. A presentation that FIFA had publicly committed to applying consistently across host venues in the United States. By the time that confirmation reached a global audience, the match had stopped being a football story. It had become something else entirely. But here's the question nobody was asking loudly enough. Why this match? The 2026 World Cup has 104 matches. Dozens of them involve nations from conservative religious and cultural backgrounds. The tournament had already generated controversy about empty seats, VAR decisions, visa denials, and anthem protests. Every match was carrying its own weight. But Egypt versus Iran specifically became the flashpoint. Why? The answer does not start in Seattle. It does not even start in June. It starts in a decision FIFA made years before this tournament began. A decision that was supposed to solve a completely different problem. And a moment in Qatar in 2022 that left a mark on football's governing body that has not faded since. Qatar 2022 was the first Middle Eastern World Cup, a historic expansion of where football's biggest stage could be held. And it arrived with a question that FIFA had no clean answer for. What would happen when fans who were LGBTQ, or who wanted to visibly support LGBTQ rights, arrived at stadiums in a country where same-sex relationships are criminalized? The answer when it arrived was not reassuring. Fans carrying rainbow flags reported being stopped at stadium entrances. The situations that followed were confused, inconsistently handled, and played out in front of cameras that sent the footage everywhere. FIFA's messaging was contradictory. Different officials gave different answers. The organization that claims to govern the world's game had no coherent, enforceable, clearly communicated policy for the fans most directly affected by the host country's laws. The coverage was damaging, not primarily because of what happened at individual incidents, but because of what those incidents revealed. That FIFA had awarded the World Cup to a country with specific laws regarding LGBTQ people, without a clear plan for how it would protect the fans those laws affected most directly. And when the moment came, the world was watching. When the 2026 World Cup was awarded to the United States, Canada, and Mexico, FIFA's public communications became notably clearer on this question. All fans are welcome. Rainbow flags and pride symbols are permitted inside and around FIFA events. The governing body stated explicitly that this position would be applied consistently across host venues where the legal framework supports it. It sounded like the lesson from Qatar had been applied. It was about to create a completely different problem, because the Qatar approach and the 2026 approach were solving different things. Qatar was about avoiding a visible failure of protection. The 2026 approach was about making a visible statement of inclusion. And visible statements, at a football tournament followed by billions of people across every culture on Earth, do not land the same way in every country where those billions of people live. And of all the matches at the 2026 World Cup where this would generate controversy, the schedule had produced Egypt versus Iran, two Muslim-majority nations, one in active military conflict with the host country, the other playing its most consequential group match after 2 weeks of carrying a political weight that no other team at this tournament had been asked to carry. The combination was not designed to create controversy, but it created it anyway, in a way that no other fixture at this tournament could have replicated quite so completely. When news of the match presentation spread publicly, the reaction did not build the way most football controversies do. No period where only specialist football media was covering it, before it crossed into mainstream attention. The response was immediate, and it was global. The story spread across the Arabic-speaking football world within hours of confirmation, running across social media platforms, football forums, and news outlets simultaneously. From Egypt, from Iran, from the wider Muslim-majority world across the Middle East, North Africa, and beyond, the response was overwhelming in its scale, not monolithic in its content, not every voice saying the same thing, but enormous in volume and speed. FIFA's decision was the subject of more online conversation in those 48 hours than almost anything else connected to the 2026 World Cup. The story crossed into mainstream coverage in multiple European countries, in South America, in North America, not in football sections, in mainstream news. And at the center of all of it, a question that FIFA's inclusion statement had not answered, and that the statement's reissuing in slightly different language also could not answer. Does genuine inclusion mean treating every match at every venue identically, regardless of who is playing? Or does genuine inclusion mean being sensitive to the specific identities and cultural backgrounds of the teams, fans, and communities involved in each fixture? FIFA had answered the first way. A significant portion of the global football audience, specifically from the communities most directly connected to the teams playing, experienced that answer as a failure of the second. To understand why the reaction landed the way it did, you need to understand the specific contexts that Egypt and Iran brought to this moment, not as a judgment on those contexts, as a factual account of why the match environment resonated so differently in Seattle and in Cairo and in Tehran. Egypt is one of the most populous and religiously significant nations in the Arab world. Same-sex relationships are not criminalized under a specific statute in Egypt, but LGBTQ people face prosecution under morality laws, and the social and religious weight attached to questions of sexuality is significant and institutionally present. For many Egyptian supporters, the visual environment they encountered in Seattle was not experienced as a neutral sporting welcome. It was experienced as a statement about values that many of them, in their private and public lives, hold differently. That experience was not universal among Egyptian fans. Within the Egyptian diaspora, in the United States and Europe, responses were varied and complex. Some Egyptian supporters expressed no objection, others expressed strong discomfort. The community was not monolithic. But the volume of public response coming from Egypt and from Egyptian football communities abroad was impossible to ignore. Iran's situation carried additional layers that made it uniquely complicated. The Iranian squad had been navigating the most politically charged tournament campaign in recent World Cup history. Their base camp was in Tijuana, Mexico, because the United States government had not permitted them to stay overnight on American soil. They had crossed the border on every match day. Members of their coaching staff had been denied visas to enter the host country. Their national anthem had been booed at both of their Los Angeles matches by sections of the Iranian-American diaspora who opposed the current Iranian government. And now, the group stage decider they had fought to reach was being played in a visual environment that under Iranian law would be described in terms fundamentally different from the language FIFA was using to justify it. The Iranian Football Federation expressed concern publicly in the days before the match. The federation called on FIFA to consider the cultural context of the specific nations playing. The statement was careful to separate the federation's position from any hostility toward individual people. But the concern was public, and it was direct. FIFA reaffirmed its inclusion policy. And here is where the silence became the most powerful element of the entire story. Because while the world argued, the players said nothing. Neither squad issued public statements about the match environment. Neither coaching staff held extraordinary press conferences. The Egyptian and Iranian players, who had more personal stake in this situation than anyone else involved, did something that the rest of the world seemed incapable of doing in those 48 hours. They focused on the football. Carlos Queiroz had already delivered the most cutting post-match line of the tournament when he looked directly at a FIFA official in a press conference room and asked whether VAR was still working. He knew exactly how to use the media when he chose to. He had proven it. In the days before Egypt versus Iran, he chose not to. He prepared his team, he studied Egypt's defensive structure, he made his plans. When journalists pushed him on the match environment in his pre-match press conference, his response made clear that his attention was on the game. Egypt's technical staff did the same. Both benches had made the same calculation independently. The world outside the stadium was having an argument that had been building for years and would continue long after the final whistle. The world inside the stadium would be decided by football. But here is what that professional silence could not resolve. The fans were not silent. And when the supporters arrived at the stadium in Seattle, they were arriving from a week of the most intense pre-match controversy any of them had experienced going into a football match. Egyptian supporters who had traveled from Cairo, from Alexandria, from diaspora communities across Europe and North America walked toward a stadium entrance in which the visual environment was exactly what the previous week's argument had been about. Iranian supporters, the diaspora communities in Los Angeles and New York and London and Toronto, who had followed their team's extraordinary journey through this tournament with the specific emotional investment that comes from watching your country navigate the impossible, walked through the same entrances with the same complex feelings. And then something happened that the pre-match coverage had not fully predicted. They sat down, and they watched football, not with the tension of two communities unable to share a space, with the specific, electric, genuine energy of a match where everything is at stake, because the football was real. That is the fact that the 48 hours of argument had almost buried completely. This was a genuine football match between two teams with genuine quality and genuine stakes. Iran needed a result to have any chance of reaching the knockout stage. Egypt needed a result to confirm what their performances throughout the group had suggested. These were not players going through a formality. Taremi had crossed the border that morning. He had done it for every match of this tournament. He had played every minute of a World Cup campaign under circumstances that had no precedent in the competition's history. He had scored a goal against Belgium that the technology took back. He had led Iran to draws against New Zealand and Belgium from a hotel in Tijuana, with portions of his coaching staff unable to enter the country. In Seattle, on the most controversial stage the tournament had produced, he was the most dangerous player on the pitch for long periods of the first half. Barendvond, who had been named the match's outstanding player by viewers after his 7-save performance against Belgium, was again the reason the match stayed level long past the point where the balance of play suggested it should. His reading of angles in tight situations, the physical presence that made him appear to fill more of the goal that his frame should logically occupy, was the wall Iran needed him to be. Egypt's winner, when it came, was the product of Kairaz's preparation, meeting individual quality at exactly the right moment. The goal that ended Iran's World Cup and confirmed Egypt's place in the last 32 arrived with the kind of finality that only a match of this magnitude produces. The Egyptian celebration was genuine and unrestrained and real. The Iranian reaction was the specific, quiet devastation of a team that has left everything on the pitch and found that it was not enough. Taremi walked off the pitch. He did not gesture toward the stands. He shook hands with the players who had beaten him, looked at the badge on his shirt, and walked toward the tunnel. That walk lasted about 15 seconds. It communicated more about what football asks of the people who play it than anything that had been said in the 48 hours before kickoff. And here is the final detail that the broader coverage of this match has not fully addressed. When a FIFA official was asked in the aftermath of the match whether the organization had any reflections on how the match environment had been received, the response reaffirmed FIFA's inclusion policy. When asked whether FIFA had consulted with the Egyptian or Iranian football federations before confirming the match presentation approach, the official said that FIFA's policies are applied consistently across all tournament venues in accordance with host country frameworks. That response is not a yes, and it is not a no. It is the carefully constructed language of an organization that has made a decision, believes the decision was correct, and has concluded that elaborating on the process that produced it creates more problems than it resolves. Whether FIFA was right to make the decision it made, whether the inclusion that LGBTQ fans experienced in Seattle justified the cultural collision it produced, whether there was an approach that could have served more communities better, are questions that the football world will debate long after the trophy has been lifted. What Egypt versus Iran revealed is not that FIFA is corrupt or cowardly or ideologically captured or any of the other verdicts that the global argument produced in the days surrounding the match. What it revealed is that governing a sport that genuinely belongs to the whole world is more complicated than any policy document can fully contain. That decisions which feel straightforward in one cultural context can feel like an imposition in another. That inclusion is not a neutral concept even when it is sincerely meant. That the World Cup, for all its scale and spectacle and genuine power, has not yet found a way to be everything it promises to the full diversity of people it promises it to. The match is over. Egypt are through to the knockout stage. Iran are going home. Their campaign ended with a dignity and quality of performance that deserved a different outcome. And the question that a group stage football match in Seattle forced into the open remains exactly where it was before kickoff. Can the World Cup ever truly belong to everyone? FIFA answered with a policy statement, the players answered with a football match. And the rest of the world, the 2 billion people who follow this sport across every culture and every tradition and every set of values the planet contains, is still waiting for something that reaches further than either. What do you think? Did FIFA make the right call? Is there a version of this where every community at the World Cup feels genuinely included? Or is that the promise the modern tournament keeps making without ever being able to keep it? Leave it in the comments, because this is exactly the conversation this channel exists for.